morning. It is good to be with you all. It's good to be in the midst of another community as we come out of this pandemic world, to be reminded that we are journeying together, that it is not just us in our homes or in our little institutions that are doing this work, but that we are part of a wider community walking with God. I want to thank Dr. Williams so much for his hospitality, for Dr. Oradine, for her kind invitation to come, for Reverend Dr. Fluker's invitation to be part of this worship space, and for the entire Brite community, and for the welcome and hospitality that you've shown me. So this morning I want to talk a little bit about embroidery in the wilderness. One of the things I love about this passage is this juxtaposition of wandering, of uncertainty, and yet in the midst, what does it mean to make and to create? So this morning I want us to think about what it means to be in a world not of our own making, where we can barely remember the suffering of our mothers and fathers that they ran from, where each day we wake up to wandering and wondering where home, peace, some semblance of rest will take shape on the horizon. We are living in a moment of uncertainty. I don't need to tell anyone that. We feel it in our bones, don't we? Exuberance as we can begin to see our worlds opening up a bit. But there is still so much unanswered. So much that feels tenuous. I live on the West Coast, and for the last 14 years, we moved, and part of the joy of living through the gray are 3 months of 70s sun from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. It almost gets a little overwhelming. It's too much sun. Just spread it out over the year, please, a little bit. And so for 3 months of those 70s, we get to enjoy and live and gird ourselves for the 6 months of the dark wet. But with the shifts in climate, the summer now is no longer a space of hope for us in the Pacific Northwest. It's a place of wondering how bad the droughts are. How bad were the droughts in California, in Oregon, in British Columbia? Will forest fires be so bad that we are housebound for days in the midst of record-breaking heat and no air conditioning? We go into this summer now wondering, hoping. So this shift feels something like the moment of moving from a pandemic world into a post-pandemic world, I think. We've seen so much. We know the reality of racist regimes. We know the numbers of those who will be complicit, or at least turn a blind eye. We feel the way our political and economic systems are weighted against the possibility of flourishing for everyone. We see the ways that trans bodies and lives are being policed and threatened every single day. We are still very much in a wilderness moment. And so I wonder how much of this uncertainty was running through the people of Israel as they wandered in the desert, wondering about what the promised land would be like, why their lives felt so uncertain, even though they were supposedly free. In the midst of this uncertainty, Moses ascends Mount Sinai, and there he receives the law, and I'm sure this feels familiar. All the shouts and the shout-nots, the 10 Commandments, 10 laws etched into a stone tablet to guide the people in their new lives, apart from Egyptian rule and labor. The image comes pretty easy to most of us. But at the top of this same mountain, along with the law, God gives Moses something else. He gives Moses instructions on how to build the Ark of the Covenant and the Tent of Meeting. Now, the Ark might be most familiar to most of us. At least we might remember the Ark. Maybe you watch Indiana Jones and you see the one, it opens up and it melts everybody's faces. I was like 10 when I saw it. I was like scared the crap out of me. And that was the Ark for me. But in addition to this, God gives Moses the guidelines to creating a space to meet with God, to abide and worship and remind the people that their God is near. In these instructions, God is saying, I want to live with you. Interesting, isn't it? That in all of our recollections, it's the law that's remembered as coming from God and not the plans for the tabernacle. But if I begin to recall the many stories of God's word doing something, I am reminded that the law is never alone. The word is never without enfleshment. A tentative meeting where the divine and the creature meet and are held together in faith and adoration. Not unlike that very moment of creation of human beings. Let us make them in our image. And the clay is imbued with spirit. These creatures arise and awake, and they are the conjoining of God and the earth. God does this again and again and again. And so Moses descends the mountain and tablets and plans in hand. Israel is to receive and to build, to be cultivated and to cultivate. But as Moses comes around the last bend of the mountain road, what does he see? You know this part of the story too. He sees his people having grown impatient with Moses' absence, growing weary in their wait for the fulfillment of God's promise. They took some gold that they plundered from Egypt, melted it down, and formed a golden calf. This is not an act utterly opposed to what God intended for Israel. Like so much unfaithfulness, it is not a direct opposition, but it is a slight misdirection of what God intended. A misdirection of the gifts that God gives and the capabilities, the craftsmanship that becomes misaligned and begins to veer off away from us. No, the impulse to create is not far from God's hope for us. But the calf is a different kind of enfleshment, a different kind of manifestation. It is the incarnation of fear. A fear that begins to play with our memory, blurs the edges of our pain, so that only a mythical picture of an idyllic day remains. Faced with miles and days and months and years of unknowing and a seemingly absent leader who didn't even talk like them or walk like them. Remember, Moses was foreign to them. They began to feel backwards, trying to bring that imagined past into the present. They melted down the resources intended to sustain them and instead fashioned an idol upon which they hoisted all of their angst and anger and fear, praying that somehow this old form could resuscitate some semblance of freedom, anything that was more solid than their ill-defined current moment. And of course, we remember what happened next. Moses throws down the tablet. He rebukes the people. With the law of God in pieces on the floor and the plans in the folds of his robes, he turns back again to Sinai to intercede for his people, to receive the law again, and again he descends down. This time his face shining with the glory of God. Moses gives the law to the people, and then he calls for offerings of gold and silver and fabric and gems. Even that golden calf, even that mark of unfaithfulness can be remade again into faithfulness. And then he calls for the artisans, the craftspeople. In the face of a people who did not believe, occupying a land that was not theirs, without knowing a time when they would be home, Moses persists with the call to create. Certainly there were better things to do: fetch wood, build shelters, something more practical to do in the midst of all of this. But the question wasn't whether to create, it was what to create. We sometimes think that faith is an invisible feeling or an ineffable force that somehow animates us. And we have to cling to that as we walk through a world of temptations or material concerns that should somehow be behind us. It's not this world, the material world, it's the next world. And that's the mark of my faith. But as Moses calls the artisans, probably the very same ones who had been charged with forging the idols, God is saying to Israel, your faith is a creative faith. Your life with me is a present, material, felt reality. Taste and see, touch and feel, smell and sense the goodness of my life and your life together. In response to receiving the word, the law, the people design ornamentation, cut acacia trees, strip bark, stoke fires, and push and pull thread and needle through fabric. They embroider, drawing thread in and out countless times until shape begins to form. They sand down branches until rough trees become smooth poles. And they polish and press gold onto panels until plain wood draws in light and kisses it out. In the face of betrayal and endless wandering, God does not ask Moses to find map makers or warriors or even priests. Moses calls the artists, the makers, those who can sit and put their hands to work that seem to be doing nothing until something comes into being. He calls those who can dream and imagine where there is only a blank wall, who can see a structure before it is built and the painstaking process it takes to bring that picture into being. Biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann suggests that the cultic life of Israel is a reenactment of creation. The worship life of Israel pointing again and again to creation itself. And this seems right to me, though perhaps less because of the archaeological or literary patterns. It seems right to me because word is never without presence in God's life. There is never only law or idea or doctrine. There are only words becoming flesh, comminglings of eternity and time that leave us with an uneasy joy that we are more than what we see, but what we are is also holy. So in Israel's middle place between liberation and home, in the panic and fear and exhaustion, in their terror of seeing what some will do when they sense control slipping from their fingers, Moses gives Israel the law and all the promises they hold. Then he invites all who believe to respond, to participate, to worship by creating, adorning, laboring. And in their work, they make visible God's life among them, a space that will travel with them in the many miles left before them, that will speak and sing even when those whose fingers bore the calluses of its creation have long since died. God invites them to be co-creators in the cultivation of God's presence among them, in the lives of their people. In the face of wandering, God asks them to adorn themselves, to build. And here we are today in our own kind of middle space. Some of us fearful and anxious, some of us wondering when this will ever be our home, and perhaps some hoping for a time when things were simpler, more straightforward, as the world seems to shift under our feet. But if we are to believe in this God become flesh, perhaps we can begin to see a resemblance between God's words to Moses at the top of Mount Sinai and in the Son of God become the Son of Mary. Perhaps we can see the possibility that there is not word of promise without also a call to create, that there is no rebuke without also a call to construct. In the face of fear, in the face of unknowing, and in a world where home seems only like a mirage and a fanciful delusion, can we see the truth that there is no place where God is not? And God has called us to build in our lives tents of meeting, spaces not of permanence, but of places of beauty that can be carried with us. God has given us what we need. Look all around you and you will see gold. You will see the silver. You will see the swords. You will see the trees. The images and the words used to exploit us, to steal our children and our belief, turn our labors into their riches. But words and images, gold and silver, swords and shields can be melted and banged and bent to become something new. They can be reconfigured to enflesh a new world imagined at the top of that mountain. In Jesus, we are birthed within this law made flesh, a holy structure that carries us even as we image him. How will we build in our lives? Will we rely on the idols of our enslavers? Will we receive with new eyes? Will we give up our spoils for the sake of the community's mutual building? Will we learn new skills and new techniques? Will we sit for hours shaving down planks or making countless stitches? Or even more, will you allow yourselves to become the work? Some of you who are watching, sitting, listening this morning might need to let yourselves be cut down, be melted and reshaped. Some of those who left Pharaoh's lands carried with them a status they received from a regime ruled by fear and violence, and it mattered little whether God gave them that certainty was with Israel or with Egypt. They still wanted to be the same. But the world is not the same anymore. Your status in this new middle place cannot remain the same, no matter how many golden calves you erect, trying to bring back your better days. And some of you in this room must let yourself be adorned, to see the abiding God who has not left you, but sees you by her side. You are beautiful. You are home. Now, my wife and I, we've moved a lot in our lives. Even in the house we're in now, we thought we would be there for only a year, and so we left the walls white and didn't hang any pictures or get decent furniture. By the time we found ourselves in a house that second year, we began to realize the lack of adornment was not prudence, but fear. A visualization of the loss of hope that we had and our uncertainty if anything good might really come. Let's not do anything special. Let's not make this place home because we don't know if we'll be able to stay. But to adorn your home, your body, your life with friends or walks or pictures. To say that beauty is for you is to say that God has made my body to speak, to be home, even in this wandering place. That every land is a motherland, even if in every land I am also a stranger. In either case, in both cases, we are called to become tents of meeting. The world is a fearful place, but let us hear the call this morning to create in the face of it, because you are the bronze altars, the hooks, the acacia pillars, the tanned goat skins, the gold lampstands, the purple clothes so richly embroidered. You are co-creators and you are the creations. Participants in a holy moment, confessions of a blessed and dangerous truth, that God adorned you to be the Word's birth, his life, his death, his resurrection. In Jesus you have been cut and shaped and knit together into a glorious temple. And may we live as though the work is already finished. God is already here. And God has already won. We are free. And evil cannot win as long as we are unafraid to live as liberated people. Go in peace and let your lives become tents of meeting, adorned in the love and presence of a God who desires all of us to be free and to be with. Amen.